She's sweet, Richard Evelyn said, with a smile as sharp as her diamonds. But let's be honest, she'll never understand real wealth. I set my teacup down, meeting her gaze. Maybe not your kind of wealth, Evelyn, but I do understand value, especially the kind your lawyers just finalized. It started as most family wars do, with a group chat. A digital grenade lobbed into the carefully manicured ecosystem of the Miller family. Evelyn, my mother-in-law, reigned over us all from her ivory tower of inherited wealth and impeccable taste. Her pronouncements were law delivered, with the saccharine authority of someone who believed God had personally blessed her with good stock options. The message landed precisely at 10:17 a.m. Dearest family. It began the words already feeling heavy with unstated expectation. For my 70th, I envision an evening that reflects true legacy and prosperity. The theme is simple. Asterisk, asterisk, gold. Asterisk, asterisk. Everyone please dress accordingly. I expect a certain standard. My stomach performed a familiar, tight little flip. Asterisk gold. Asterisk, not just any color, but the Times color. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a litmus test. A Miller standard. I was Grace Miller, married to Richard, the middle son, the one deemed adequate but never quite heir apparent. I taught high school English. I drove a sensible sedan. I believed in paying my taxes early, and the profound beauty of a well-placed semicolon. My life by Miller standards was admirable as long as it remained safely peripheral. I spent the afternoon indulging in the fantasy. I pulled out a dress I'd saved for years, a cascade of champagne gold silk, elegant understated, the kind of dress that whispered quality instead of screaming expense. It complemented the auburn in my hair, I thought, catching the reflection in the full-length mirror. It felt right. The next morning, the digital grenade detonated its secondary payload. A private message blinked onto my phone from Caroline, my sister-in-law, Caroline Evelyn's darling, who lived in the shadow of a trust fund, and whose main hobby was judging everyone else's perceived lack of pedigree. Grace, the message read short and chillingly polite. Quick heads up from Mom. She was thinking about the gold theme, and she mentioned maybe skipping it this year. It's kind of reserved for the Times. Real Times Millers, you know. Just trying to save you the trouble of finding something. I stared at the screen. The sun was streaming through my kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The silence that followed Caroline's message was sharper, more cutting than any direct confrontation Evelyn could have mustered. It wasn't just about the dress. It was about the seat at the table, the very category I belonged to. I was an adornment, a nice accessory for Richard, but decidedly Times not. Times the gold standard. I closed the message. I didn't reply. What was there to say, Times? Thank you for clarifying my lesser status, Times. I folded the champagne gold dress back into its box, gently smoothing out a wrinkle near the hem, and slid the box to the back of my closet. Some silences are sharper than any reply. A few days later, we were all gathered for Sunday brunch at Evelyn's estate. A ritualistic affair held in the sun-drenched conservatory that always smelled faintly of lilies and judgment. Evelyn, perfectly coiffed and draped in a cream-colored ensemble that probably cost more than my car, leaned across the massive, gleaming mahogany table. Her voice was modulated to perfection, sweet as syrup and twice as sticky. Richard, darling. She began, her eyes flicking dismissively over my modest linen blouse before settling back on her son. Your wife is adorable, truly. Such a lovely teacher. But tell me, does she really understand what it means to manage family wealth, the intricacies, the Times, legacy Times, or is she still teaching for fun? The question hung there, dripping with condescension. Surrounding me, the Miller cousins and aunts offered soft, practiced laughter, the sound of old money trying to agree without actually agreeing to anything too binding. They weren't laughing at a joke. They were laughing at the idea that someone like me, someone who worked for a living, could comprehend their rarefied world. My hands were cold, though the conservatory was warm. I felt Richard shift uncomfortably beside me, already bracing for a fight he hated. I placed my teacup down with deliberate care, ensuring the delicate china made no sound against the saucer. I looked directly at Evelyn, allowing a small, genuine smile to touch my lips. "Evelyn," I said, my voice level, projecting just enough to carry over the polite murmurs. "I've always believed the greatest inheritance isn't measured in portfolios or properties. It's how we treat people, the kindness we extend when no one is watching, and the dignity we afford even those we deem beneath us." The laughter died, instantly replaced by an awkward, heavy stillness. The air, moments before buzzing with superficial warmth, dropped several degrees. Evelyn's smile didn't falter, but it changed. It became thin, rehearsed, stretched tight across her face, like poorly applied varnish. She grabbed the silver sugar tongs with unnecessary force. "Well, that's certainly admirable, Grace," she clipped out. "But we were discussing liquidity ratios." Richard passed the smoked salmon. "Would you—" The subject was murdered, buried under talk of market trends and vacation homes. But I could feel it, the temperature in the room had officially plummeted. I had drawn a line in the sand with a teacher's quiet conviction, and they had noticed. 2 days later, the official invitation arrived. It wasn't printed on heavy cardstock. It was an email, terse and impersonal, sent from Evelyn's assistant. The subject line, Times seating arrangement for Harold Miller's 70th birthday dinner. Asterisk. I scrolled down, my breath catching in my throat. The list was extensive. The cousins, the great aunts, the business partners, the social secretary. My name wasn't on it. Richard was already home when I showed him. He stared at the screen, rubbing the back of his neck, that familiar gesture of a man caught between his mother and his wife. "Grace, look, Mom, just—" She was worried you'd be bored with the usual crowd. "Bored, Richard." I managed a weak laugh. Or perhaps not gold enough. He sighed, the sound weary. "Look, it's just one dinner. I can skip it. We can go out somewhere quiet." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I didn't want a quiet dinner. I wanted acknowledgement. You go, Richard. Celebrate your mother." He hesitated, his guilt palpable. "She just thought you might feel out of place." I smiled again, that practiced, slightly distant smile I'd perfected over the years of navigating Miller gatherings. It was the smile of someone who knew the rules, but refused to play by them. "That's fine," I told him, looking out the window at the meticulously manicured lawn. "One day she'll find my name somewhere she never expected." The night of the dinner, I was grading essays on Times, The Great Gatsby. Times, the themes of old money and hollow striving, feeling painfully relevant. Richard had called earlier, his voice tight, describing the blinding spectacle of gold fabrics and diamond necklaces. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. "Hello? Is this Mrs. Grace Miller?" The voice was professional, crisp, utterly devoid of familial warmth. "It is. Mrs. Miller. This is Mr. Davies from Harper & Wells Law." Harper & Wells. Harold Miller's firm. The legal titans who handled the Miller dynasty's fortunes for 3 generations. My father-in-law, Harold, was their most venerable client. "Yes, Mr. Davies. Is everything all right with Harold?" I asked, suddenly anxious. Harold was Evelyn's husband, Richard's father, and the true patriarch of the family. He was frail, but usually lucid. "Mr. Harold Miller passed away peacefully this afternoon, Mrs. Miller. I sincerely offer my condolences." The world tilted slightly. The snow began outside, soft, patient, inevitable. Like the truth. "I see," I whispered. The will reading, "That is why I am calling Mr." Davies continued his tone, gaining an urgent precision. "Mr. Miller left specific instructions regarding the reading. It is scheduled for 9:00 a.m. tomorrow morning. And Mrs. Miller, this is crucial. He requested that Times only you Times be present if possible. Evelyn and the children are aware of the time, but this specific session is for you alone. Only me." I hung up the phone, the receiver feeling cold in my hand. I looked out at the first soft flakes dusting the glass. Harold had bypassed the entire structure Evelyn had built. He hadn't just seen my gilded cage, he'd seen the person trapped inside it. The next morning, the offices of Harper and Wells were exactly as I expected. Mahogany, thick carpets designed to silence footsteps, and the faint lingering smell of cold paper and legacy. When I was ushered into the conference room, I found everyone already seated. Evelyn, dressed in a severe black gown that still managed to look expensive, sat ramrod straight. Richard and Caroline flanked her, their faces, pale masks of polite grief that barely disguised a desperate curiosity about the hierarchy of mourning. Evelyn looked up, her expression, a complex mixture of shock and fury. My absence from her birthday dinner had been an offense. My presence here, summoned by Harold himself, was a declaration of war. Grace Evelyn hissed under her breath, gesturing to the empty chair at the head of the table, the one traditionally reserved for the patriarch. The lawyer told us to wait. What in God's name did you do to him in these last few weeks? I believe I said calmly, taking the chair Harold had indicated for me, a seat precisely at the center of the long table, neither too high nor too low, but perfectly positioned. We should let Mr. Davies begin. Mr. Davies, a man whose expression suggested he had seen empires rise and fall due to misplaced commas, cleared his throat and opened a thick, leather-bound document. As per the final wishes of the late Mr. Harold Miller, he began, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. We will proceed with the execution of his last testament, dated 6 months prior to his passing. Evelyn leaned forward, expecting the usual distribution, the controlling interest in Miller Corp. To Richard, the antique jewelry to Caroline, a sizable trust for her own comfort to Mr. Davies read on, his voice steady, detached from the unfolding drama, regarding all personal real estate, including the primary residence at 400 Evergreen Lane and the lake house situated on Lake Serenity. A beat of silence, heavy with anticipation, shall be immediately and irrevocably transferred to Mrs. Grace Miller. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the silence of contemplation. It was the silence of shattered assumptions. It was the sound of an entire financial universe grinding to a halt. Caroline's carefully painted smile froze mid-expression, cracking like cheap porcelain. Richard's head snapped up, his eyes wide, darting from the lawyer to me, then finally dropping to the polished surface of the table as if seeking an answer there. Evelyn simply looked empty. The armor of impeccable composure cracked just enough to reveal the raw, terrifying insecurity beneath. I, however, did none of those things. I looked at Mr. Davies and gave a small, measured nod. Reason, stated Mr. Davies, continued reading Harold's neat script aloud, his voice conveying the deliberate weight of the words. She is the only one in this family who never looked at me through the lens of money. She saw the man, not the vault. I felt a profound wave of sadness mixed with startling, quiet validation. Harold hadn't just given me property. He had given me the truth. He had confirmed that my perceived weakness, my lack of avarice, was in fact the only currency he respected. Evelyn finally moved her hand, trembling, as she reached for a glass of water. She missed. The glass tipped cascading water across the mahogany, a stark, wet stain on the polished order. "This is an outrage," Evelyn finally gasped, her voice ragged. "He was unwell. Grace manipulated him. She played the martyr Mrs. Miller," Mr. Davies interjected coolly. "Mr. Miller was examined by 2 independent physicians 2 weeks ago, confirming his full capacity. This document is notarized, witnessed, and legally binding. Grace is now the owner of both properties, effective immediately." I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at Evelyn. I simply gathered my purse. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," I said softly. "I will contact your office next week regarding the transfer of the estate paperwork." I walked out, leaving them submerged in the wreckage of their assumptions. Sometimes silence does the speaking for you. And sometimes a very large piece of real estate speaks volumes more. That afternoon, the fury arrived. It didn't knock. It didn't wait for an invitation. Evelyn stormed into my modest house, The one Richard and I had bought years ago. The one with the slightly leaky faucet and the overflowing bookshelf like a gust of old perfume and righteous fury. She stood framed in the doorway, her expensive black dress looking garish against the backdrop of my worn, comfortable furniture. "What did you do to him?" she demanded, her voice vibrating with unspent adrenaline. "Manipulate him with your pity, with that innocent act of yours, that pathetic little schoolmarm routine. You preyed on his weakness." She expected me to crumble, to offer a tearful denial, to admit to some Machiavellian plot hatched in secret. I had expected this confrontation for years. I just hadn't expected it to come so soon after Harold's passing. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I walked over to my small digital recorder, the one I used for drafting lesson plans, and pressed play. Harold's voice, frail but clear, imbued with the gentle authority of a man who no longer needed to impress anyone, filled the room. Evelyn will call this manipulation. Richard will call it a mess. Caroline will call it unfair. But I am leaving my properties to Grace, because she understood something fundamental that all of you missed. Dignity is not bought. It is demonstrated. Grace never asked for a thing. She offered respect when you offered condescension. If there's anyone in this family who still understands what it means to be truly wealthy in spirit, wealthy in character, it's you, Grace. You'll know what to do when the time comes. Asterisk. The recording ended. The quiet hum of my refrigerator returned, filling the sudden vacuum. Evelyn stood utterly still. She didn't rage. The script had been flipped, the monologue stolen. Her lips trembled, not with guilt. Evelyn didn't do guilt, but with pure, unadulterated disbelief that her carefully constructed reality had been overruled by a dead man's genuine affection. She stared at the recorder, then at me, searching for the performance, the trick. She found nothing but quiet resolve. For the first time since I married Richard, Evelyn Miller had nothing left to say. She turned on her heel and walked out, slamming the door so hard a framed poem fell off the wall. I didn't pick it up right away. I sat down, feeling the exhaustion of years lift from my shoulders. Harold hadn't just signed over property, he had validated my entire way of being. Weeks later, the snow had melted, replaced by the hesitant green of early spring. The Miller family had retreated into their various compounds, processing the seismic shift in wealth distribution in their own specialized ways. Evelyn managed her outrage through expensive charity work. Richard navigated his guilt by becoming excessively helpful, and Caroline launched a bitter, poorly veiled social media campaign questioning the efficacy of probate law. I was moving into the lake house. It was Harold's creation, built years ago, when he still believed family meant warmth and quiet evenings, long before Evelyn had turned every gathering into a Forbes annual review. It was all wood and glass overlooking the water, the structure itself seeming to breathe in harmony with the landscape. The first thing I did, after securing the perimeter and ensuring the staff knew their paychecks now came directly from me, was look at the dining room. It was vast, showcasing an enormous, ornate mahogany table, the kind designed for 18 people, each seated as far from the next as possible, separated by acres of polished wood. It was Evelyn's favorite piece, installed by Harold specifically to make family dinners feel like UN summits. I had it removed. The process took 3 burly men and an entire morning. I watched as the monstrous thing was hauled out, the impression of its massive feet left on the carpet like ghost wounds. In its place, I ordered a new table. This one was sturdy oak, handcrafted, warm to the touch. It wasn't as long, but it was wider, more communal. And this time, there were more chairs than strictly necessary, 12 arranged to encourage conversation, not intimidation. I didn't invite the Millers. Not yet. Instead, I sent invitations to those Harold had always treated with polite distance, those who made the vastness of his wealth possible, but were never allowed to touch the velvet rope Maria, the housekeeper who had cared for his mother, Mr. Henderson, the quiet, stoic gardener who kept the grounds looking perfect, despite Evelyn's constant meddling, and John, the retired driver who knew every back road in 3 counties. They arrived hesitantly that evening, dressed in their best clothes, looking deeply uncomfortable in the spacious, elegant home. They kept looking over their shoulders, expecting Evelyn's security detail to escort them out. I greeted them at the door, wearing a simple sapphire dress, no gold required. "Welcome," I said, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything. "Please come in. Dinner is ready." We sat down at the new table. The setting was elegant, but relaxed. Maria kept trying to pour water for everyone else before serving herself. Mr. Henderson kept apologizing for the mud on his shoes, though the floors were spotless. But as the meal progressed, something shifted. I wasn't talking about stocks or real estate. I was talking about their lives. I asked Mr. Henderson about his prize-winning roses, which Evelyn had forbidden him from planting near the main house. I asked Maria about her grandchildren. I asked John about his retirement plans. We laughed. Real laughter, unrestrained and warm, bouncing off the glass walls overlooking the darkening lake. The silence at the table was the comfortable silence of shared humanity, not the tense silence of social hierarchy. We talked for hours. For the first time in years, I felt entirely at ease in a Miller residence. As the evening wound down, and Maria and Mr. Henderson offered profuse thanks before leaving, John lingered sipping the strong coffee I'd brewed. "Mrs. Miller," he said, looking toward the head of the table, the spot I had consciously left empty, though the chair was set just like the others. "Mr. Harold, he was a good man, but he was trapped." "I know, John," I replied, looking too. The winter wind, having done its work earlier in the year, now sounded like a gentle memory whistling across the frozen expanse of the lake outside. The ice was beginning to crack as the spring thaw approached, a metaphor I couldn't ignore. I looked toward that empty chair, the symbolic seat of power Harold had relinquished. "I kept my grace, Harold." I whispered my voice, carrying only across the polished oak, intended for the memory of the man who saw past the gold. "And I kept your promise, too."